The dead woman. The sound came first, wind howling through the pines like a wounded animal, then the cold sharp enough to cut through wool and leather and skin, and finally the color, red on white, blood on snow. Her name was Alice Drummond. She was 24 years old, and she was supposed to marry me today. The words belonged to Finn Carroll, though he would not speak them aloud for another 3 days. Right now, in this moment, frozen between heartbeats and horror, he could only stare at what the storm had uncovered. The body lay half buried in a snowdrift at the edge of town, one pale hand reaching toward the sky as if grasping for something that had already slipped away. The wedding dress clung to her small frame, ice crystals forming delicate patterns across the white fabric. Her blonde hair spread around her head like a halo, darker now with melted snow and something else. Something that had come from India in a single wound across her windpipe. Clean. Professional. The kind of wound a man makes when he knows exactly what he is doing. Finn knelt beside her, his weathered hands hovering over her face without touching. He had seen death before. The war had taught him that lesson young, carved it deep into his bones, along with all the other things he wished he could forget. But this was different. This was not some nameless soldier bleeding out in mud. This was a girl who had traveled 1,000 miles to marry a stranger who had arrived in Tin Cup, Colorado, with hope still bright in her blue eyes, who had tried on this dress just yesterday and spun in a circle to make the skirts flutter. The wind picked up, throwing snow across the scene like a shroud. Finn stood slowly, his knees protesting the movement. At 36, he felt older than his years. The high country did that to a man. Ground him down until he was more stone than flesh, more silence than speech. He turned toward town where lamplight flickered in windows and smoke rose from chimneys into the gray morning sky. Someone in one of those buildings had done this. Someone he probably knew. Someone who might be watching even now. The thought settled in his gut like a stone. He walked back to his horse, pulled himself into the saddle, and rode toward the sheriff's office. Behind him, the body remained where the storm had left it. A bride who would never make it to the altar, a girl who had come west looking for a new life and found only an early grave. Alice Drummond would be the first to die, but she would not be the last. 48 hours earlier, the stagecoach came in with the blizzard. Ruby, Catherine Vale, stepped down onto frozen ground and felt the wind try to push her back into the coach, back toward wherever she had come from, back to any place that was not here. She set her feet and leaned into it instead. The wool coat she wore was good quality, bought in Denver 3 weeks ago with the last of her traveling money. The boots were better broken in over 10 years of walking roads that never seemed to end. And the scar on her right palm, visible even through her glove when she gripped the coach door, was oldest of all. She was tall for a woman, 5 feet 8 inches of lean muscle and hard-traveled bone. Her hair, dark auburn and pulled back severe from her face, showed streaks of lighter color where the sun had touched it. Her eyes gray-green, like winter ice over deep water, missed nothing. Not the way the driver watched her with something between curiosity and concern. Not the small crowd gathered outside the general store, their faces turned toward the arriving coach with the hungry interest of people who had been snowed in for too long already. Not the man standing alone near the saloon, broad-shouldered and still, who looked at her once and then looked away. That would be Finn Carroll. It had to be. The letter had described him well enough. Rancher, widower, a man who kept to himself and preferred it that way. A man who supposedly wanted a wife, but had never actually said so himself. Ruby picked up her traveling bag, ignored the driver's half-hearted offer of help, and walked toward the church at the end of the street. Her breath came out in white clouds. The temperature was dropping fast. The blizzard the driver had been cursing about for the last 20 miles was nearly here. She could smell it in the air, taste the metal bite of it at the back of her throat. They had perhaps 2 hours before the snow came in earnest, maybe less. The church door stood open. Warm air and lamplight spilled out into the gathering dusk. Ruby stepped inside and found Minister Jacob Brenner lighting candles at the altar, his movements slow and precise. He turned at the sound of her boots on the wooden floor. "Good evening." His voice was quiet, careful. The voice of a man who had learned to speak softly in the presence of grief. "I need to marry immediately." Ruby set her bag down, pulled off her gloves. "Where is Finn Carroll?" The minister blinked. His face, lined and weathered like old leather, showed confusion. "I am sorry, miss, but I do not understand. Are you expected? I am Ruby Vale. I came in response to a letter sent 6 months ago. The letter was signed by F. Carroll and requested a bride through the New York matrimonial service. I have traveled 3,000 miles, so yes, I am expected." Brenner opened his mouth to respond, but the words never came. The church door burst open again, and cold wind swept through, carrying snow and noise, and a young woman who stumbled inside with her arms full of packages and her face bright with excitement. "Oh, thank goodness!" She shook snow from her blonde hair, laughing. "I thought I would freeze before I got here. Is he—" Her voice trailed off. Her blue eyes found Ruby standing by the altar. Her smile faded into something more uncertain. "Oh, hello?" Ruby studied her. Early 20s, small, barely 5 feet tall, pretty in the soft way that men seemed to like. The kind of girl who inspired protection, who made strong men want to build walls around her and keep the world away. Everything Ruby was not and had never been. The girl set down her packages and pulled a folded letter from her coat pocket. Her hands shook slightly as she unfolded it. Not from cold, from nerves. "I am Alice Drummond." She held up the letter like proof of identity. "I am here to marry Finn Carroll. I have his letter right here. It is dated 4 months ago and sent through the Helena Marriage Bureau. It promises—" She stopped, glanced at Ruby again. "It promises a good home and a fresh start." Silence filled the church like water rising. Minister Brenner looked between the two women, his expression shifting from confusion to something close to horror. "Ladies, I think there has been a terrible mistake." The door opened a third time. Snow swirled in, and with it came the man Ruby had seen outside the saloon. Finn Carroll stepped into the lamplight and stopped. His eyes, hazel and sharp beneath dark brows, moved from Ruby to Alice and back again. He took off his hat, held it in both hands. "I did not write any letters." His voice was low, rough from disuse. "My brother Luke sent those before he died. He had a habit of meddling in things that were not his business." Alice made a small sound, something between a gasp and a sob. "But the letter promised. My brother made a lot of promises he could not keep." Finn looked at her, and something in his expression softened just slightly. "I am sorry you came all this way for nothing." "For nothing." Alice repeated the words like she was testing their weight. 3 months of travel, everything I owned sold to pay for passage. My mother's wedding ring given to the coach driver as final payment because I ran out of money in Denver. For nothing. Ruby watched the girl's face crumble, watched the hope drain out of her like water from a broken cup. She felt a distant sympathy, the kind you feel for a stranger's pain when your own runs too deep to share. But sympathy would not help Alice Drummond now. Nothing would. "What about you?" The question came from Finn, directed at Ruby. His eyes met hers, held steady. "What about me?" Ruby kept her voice level, emotionless. "Why are you here? For the same reason she is. Someone signed your name to a letter. Someone promised me a home if I came. So I came. 6 months ago, yes." Finn was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice was harder. "I buried my brother 3 months ago. Whatever letters he sent, they were lies. I am not looking for a wife. I never was." "Then you have a problem." Ruby picked up her bag. "Because 2 women just traveled across half the country expecting to marry you. And there is a blizzard coming that will trap us all here for at least 2 weeks. So you can stand there and deny responsibility all you want, but it changes nothing." The wind howled outside, punctuating her words. Alice wiped her eyes, straightened her shoulders with visible effort. "Minister Brenner, is there a boarding house in town?" "There is. Beatrice Cotton runs a respectable establishment 2 streets over. I will walk you there myself. Thank you." Alice gathered her packages, careful not to look at Finn again. To Ruby she said quietly, "I am sorry if I caused trouble. I did not know there was someone else. You did not cause anything." Ruby's tone gentled slightly. "Neither of us did." After they left, Ruby and Finn stood alone in the church. The silence between them stretched like pulled wire. Someone sent those letters deliberately. Ruby spoke first because waiting for him seemed pointless. Someone used your name and your brother's death to lure two women here. The question is why. Finn put his hat back on, pulled it low. I do not know, but I intend to find out. He walked to the door, paused with his hand on the frame. You can stay at my ranch if you need shelter. There is a spare cabin. It is not much, but it is warm and defensible. Given the circumstances, having you close might be safer than leaving you in town. Safer? From what? From whoever is playing games with people's lives. Ruby considered this, considered the hard lines of his face, the way he held himself like a man who expected trouble and prepared for it. Considered the fact that someone had gone to considerable effort to bring her here, and that kind of effort usually preceded worse things. All right, I accept. They left the church together, stepping out into wind that bit deep and snow that had already started to fall in earnest. The blizzard was here. Behind them, in the warm glow of candlelight, the church stood empty and waiting. In less than a day, it would hold a body. In less than a week, it would hold 3 more. But for now, in this brief moment before the dying started, there was only the storm and 2 strangers walking into it side by side, neither knowing how much blood would fall before spring came again. The blood morning arrived pale and cold. Ruby woke in the spare cabin on Finn's property, listened to the wind, and knew without looking that the world had turned white overnight. The blizzard had come in full force just as the driver had predicted. Snow fell so thick it erased the horizon, turned day into twilight, buried fences and roads and anything that could not stand tall against it. She dressed quickly in the freezing air, pulled on her boots, wrapped her scarf tight. The main house was 50 yards away across open ground. She could barely see it through the snow, but she had survived worse conditions during the war, nursing wounded soldiers in tents that leaked and froze, and she would survive this. The door to Finn's house opened before she reached it. He stood in the doorway, already dressed, coffee in hand. Storm is bad. His breath came out white. Nothing is moving today, maybe tomorrow either. Ruby stepped inside, grateful for the warmth. Any word from town? Not yet. Roads are impassable. He poured her coffee without asking, handed it over. His sister Grace should be here soon. She lives closer, only 2 miles out, if she made it through the night. They waited, drank coffee in silence. Outside, the world disappeared into white. Grace arrived an hour later, appearing out of the storm like a ghost. She was 30, dark-haired like her brother, with the same hazel eyes and the same way of holding herself very still when she was angry. Right now she looked furious. There is a girl dead in town. The words dropped like stones into deep water. Finn set down his cup. What girl? The blonde one, the one who came yesterday. Alice. She was found an hour ago at the edge of town. Sheriff Garrison says someone cut her throat. Ruby felt the news settle into her bones, felt the familiar coldness that came with sudden death, the kind she had felt 100 times during the war and 100 times since, but this was different. This was not a soldier dying from infected wounds. This was murder. Where was she found? Finn's voice stayed level, but Ruby saw his hands clench. Near the old mine entrance. Grace's anger cracked, showed grief underneath. She was wearing a wedding dress, the one from the general store. She must have been trying it on. Someone killed her and left her in the snow. The wedding dress. Ruby remembered seeing it in the store window yesterday. White satin with pearl buttons. Alice had stood outside staring at it for a long time, her face full of longing. Someone had promised her a wedding. Someone had given her a dress instead of a husband and a knife instead of a ring. I need to see the body. Ruby stood, set down her coffee. Grace looked at her sharply. Why? Because I am a nurse. I worked field hospitals during the war. I know what wounds look like. I can tell you things the sheriff might miss. Finn studied her, his expression unreadable. Then we go together. Thêm mối bắt đầu today. Outside, a small crowd had gathered in the street despite the cold. Townspeople drawn by the news of death. Ruby scanned their faces as she walked to her horse. Most showed shock grief, the expected reactions. But one man stood apart. He was tall, gray-haired, perhaps 55, distinguished in a way that spoke of education rather than frontier roughness. He wore a gentleman's coat, well-maintained, and held himself with careful stillness. While others clustered together exchanging whispers and speculation, this man simply watched. His eyes moved from the church to the people gathered, observing with the detached interest of someone studying a phenomenon rather than mourning a tragedy. Ruby felt the familiar prickle of instinct. Something about him felt wrong, too controlled, too careful. "Who is that?" she asked Finn quietly as they mounted their horses. Finn followed her gaze. Warren Hayes, town assayer, opened his business 3, maybe 4 years back. Keeps to himself mostly. Fair in business from what I hear. Why? Just curious. But as they rode toward town, Ruby glanced back. Hayes remained where he stood watching them leave. When their eyes met across the distance, his expression did not change. No acknowledgement, no guilt, just steady observation. Then he turned and walked away, his gait smooth despite the snow. Ruby stored the image in her memory. She had been hunting ghosts for 10 years, had learned to catalog faces, mannerisms, the small tells that separated innocent men from dangerous ones. Hayes might be nothing, just another private soul in a town full of people running from pasts. Or he might be exactly what she was looking for. The ride to town took twice as long as it should have. The horses struggled through snowdrifts that came up to their chests. Because I am a nurse, I worked field hospitals during the war. I know what wounds look like. I can tell you things the sheriff might miss. Finn studied her, his expression unreadable. Then we go together. The ride to town took twice as long as it should have. The horses struggled through snowdrifts that came up to their chests. The wind tried to push them back with every step. By the time they reached Tin Cup, Ruby's face felt frozen, her hands numb even inside her gloves. Sheriff Hal Garrison met them outside the church where they had moved the body. He was 60, gray-haired and gray-bearded, with the kind of weathered face that came from decades of frontier living. His badge caught the dim light when he turned. "Finn. Miss Vale." His nod included them both. "I expected you would come. Can I see her?" Ruby's question was direct. "You have medical training, 10 years as a field nurse. If there is anything the wound can tell us, I will find it." Garrison considered this, then stepped aside. "She is in the back room. I warn you, it is not pleasant. Death never is." The church back room was cold as a crypt. Alice Drummond lay on a wooden table covered with a white sheet. Ruby pulled it back, forced herself to look with clinical detachment, to see not a dead girl, but a body with information to give. The throat wound was clean, one cut deep left to right. The killer had been right-handed, standing behind her. No hesitation marks. No defensive wounds on her hands or arms. She had not fought back. Ruby leaned closer, examining the edges of the wound. The cut was too clean for a hunting knife. Too precise. This was done with something very sharp. A razor, maybe, or a surgical blade. She checked the girl's hands next. The nails were intact, no skin underneath. No signs she had scratched her attacker. The wedding dress was torn at the hem, mud on the white fabric. She had been running before she died. Ruby stepped back, pulled the sheet up again, covered that pale, peaceful face. Garrison watched from the doorway. "What can you tell me? Whoever killed her knew what they were doing. This was not rage. This was execution." He came up behind her, one quick cut, very professional. She was running beforehand. You can see it in the mud on her dress, the way her boots are worn. She knew she was being hunted. Any idea who? Ruby shook her head. But I can tell you this. Whoever did it has killed before, probably many times. This is not the work of an angry drunk or a jealous lover. This is someone with practice. Finn spoke from behind her. "We need to find out why she was at the mine entrance, why she was alone, why she put on that dress." Garrison pulled out a small notebook, flipped it open. According to Beatrice Cotton, Alice asked about old miners yesterday afternoon, specifically about Confederate veterans who settled here after the war. Ruby's blood went cold. "What did you say?" The sheriff repeated it slower. "She was asking about Confederate soldiers. Did she mention any names?" 3. Minister Brenner, though he was never a soldier. Dr. Mercer, who was an Army surgeon. And a prospector named Silas Marsh, who died in a mine collapse 2 years ago. Silas Marsh. Ruby forced herself to keep breathing. How did he die? Cave in. They never recovered the body, sealed up that shaft because it was too dangerous. Where is that shaft? Near the north entrance. Why? Because whoever killed Alice knew she was asking questions, knew she was getting close to something, and they stopped her before she could find it, find what Garrison's patience was wearing thin. Ruby met his eyes. The truth. The secrets. Night fell early in the mountains. By 4 in the afternoon, the sky had gone from white to gray to black. Finn rode Ruby back to his ranch in darkness, the horses picking their way through snow that showed no sign of stopping. Grace had stayed behind to help prepare Alice's body for burial. The ground was frozen too hard to dig. They would have to keep the corpse in the church cellar until spring came and the earth softened enough to receive it. 3 months at least, maybe 4. Alice Drummond would spend the winter in the dark waiting for a grave she would never feel. At the ranch, Finn built up the fire while Ruby stood at the window watching snow fall. Her mind worked through what she had seen. The clean wound, the lack of struggle, the wedding dress, the questions about Confederate veterans. "You are not telling me everything." Finn's voice came from behind her. She turned. He stood by the fire, his face half in shadow. "No, I am not." "Why not?" "Because I do not know who to trust yet." He absorbed this without reaction. "Fair enough. But if someone in this town killed that girl, and if you know why, then keeping secrets might get you killed too." Ruby walked to the fire, held out her hands to warm them. The scar on her right palm caught the firelight, shone white against her skin. "I came here looking for someone, a man who killed people I cared about. The letter I received, the one signed with your name, it contained a phrase that only this man would use. 'The mountains remember blood.' That was what it said at the bottom." Finn watched her. And only one person ever used those words. His name is Victor Drummond. He was a Confederate officer during the war. He ran a prisoner camp where Union soldiers were tortured. After the war, he disappeared. I have been tracking him for 10 years. Why? Because he killed my sister. The words came out flat, empty of emotion. Ruby had said them so many times they had lost their weight. But the memory behind them stayed sharp. Catherine, 22 years old, laughing in the hospital tent. Catherine, trying to help prisoners escape. Catherine found 3 days later with her neck slashed, the same clean wound Alice Drummond had died from. This Victor. Finn's voice pulled her back. "You think he is here? I think someone here knows where he is, or knows who he is." The letter was bait. Someone wanted me to come. Maybe Victor himself, maybe someone who wants him found as badly as I do. And Alice Ruby turned to face him fully. Alice Drummond was Victor's daughter. The silence that followed was absolute. "How do you know?" Finn's voice had gone very quiet. "I saw a photograph in her belongings when we searched her room at the boarding house. It showed a young girl with an older man. His face was scratched out, but the handwriting on the back said, 'To my dearest Alice from Father.' And I recognized the handwriting. I have seen it on enough confiscated documents. So Victor brought his own daughter here and killed her. Why, I do not know yet, but I will find out." Finn was quiet for a long time, staring into the fire. When he spoke again, his words came slow and careful. "My brother Luke did not die of natural causes. He was murdered. 3 months ago. Same method. Clean. Professional." Ruby felt pieces clicking into place. Did the sheriff investigate Garrison? Ruled it a robbery gone wrong. Luke was known to gamble to carry money he could not afford to lose, but there was something off about it, something the sheriff did not want to look at too closely. What made you suspicious? Luke was found near the old mine entrance, the same place Alice died. And before he died, he told me he had found something that would change everything. What Finn hesitated then made his decision. "Come with me." They went out into the storm, walked across the property, to a second cabin Ruby had not noticed before. It stood dark and silent, windows boarded over. Finn unlocked the door, lit a lantern, stepped inside. The smell hit Ruby first, death cold and preserved. Then she saw him. The body lay on a makeshift table in the center of the room. Male, maybe 50 years old. Frozen solid, the features preserved by mountain cold. He wore clothes that had once been fine but were now stained and torn. And across his throat, barely visible in the lamplight, was a thin white scar. Not a fresh wound. This one was old, healed over. "Who is this?" Ruby's voice stayed steady despite the horror. "According to the papers in his pocket, this is Silas Marsh, the prospector who supposedly died in a mine collapse 2 years ago. Supposedly. I found him 3 months ago, hidden on my property in a ravine. Luke must have found him first, must have confronted whoever put him there. And that person killed Luke to keep him quiet. Ruby moved closer, examined the body with clinical focus. She checked for other wounds, for signs of how he had actually died. Then she saw them. Old scars across his back, whip marks, the kind Confederate guards gave to Union prisoners. This man was not Silas Marsh. He was one of Victor's victims. Someone who survived the camp came west to start over, and Victor found him anyway. Are you certain? Ruby pulled back the corpse's sleeve, found what she was looking for. A tattoo on the inside of his wrist. Unit numbers, Union Army 3rd Infantry. I am certain. This was a soldier. And Victor killed him, took his identity, disappeared into the mines. When this man's body surfaced, it threatened to expose everything. So Victor had to eliminate anyone who saw it, including Luke. They stood together in the frozen cabin, looking at the dead man who had carried secrets even in death. Outside, the storm howled. Inside, the truth slowly assembled itself from pieces Ruby had been gathering for 10 years. Finn broke the silence. If Victor is here, if he has been here all along, then he knows you arrived. He knows why you came. Yes, he will try to kill you. Yes, then we need to set a trap. Ruby looked at him, saw the hardness in his eyes, the determination of a man who had lost a brother and would not lose anyone else. What do you have in mind? We tell the sheriff everything. We bring Garrison here, show him the body, explain about Victor. We turn this into an official investigation, and we wait for Victor to make a mistake. You trust the sheriff. Finn considered this. I trust that he wants to find a killer as much as we do. Whether that is enough remains to be seen. They left the cabin, locked it behind them, walked back through snow that fell harder now, faster building drifts that would soon make travel impossible. Tomorrow, Finn's voice cut through the wind. We ride to town tomorrow before the roads close completely. We tell Garrison everything and we start hunting. Ruby nodded, though she knew the truth. The hunting had already started. Victor knew she was here, knew why she had come. He had killed his own daughter to protect his secrets, killed Finn's brother, killed Silas Marsh. He was watching even now, waiting for his moment. The question was not whether he would strike again. The question was who would die next. The trap. They found Sheriff Garrison at the saloon the next morning, drinking coffee and studying a map of the town. He looked up when they entered, took in their expressions, and gestured to a private corner. Tell me. Finn told him about Luke's death, about finding Silas Marsh's body on his property. Ruby told him about Victor Drummond, about the war crimes, about the 10-year hunt that had led her here, about Alice asking questions and dying for it. Garrison listened without interrupting. When they finished, he sat back, his weathered face unreadable. You are telling me there is a Confederate war criminal hiding in my town, a man who has killed at least 3 people that we know of, a man who is still here, still watching, still dangerous, yes, and you want me to help you catch him. We want you to do your job. Garrison's eyes hardened. I have been doing my job for 20 years, Miss Vale. I do not need a nurse from back east telling me how. Then prove it. Help us find him before he kills again. The sheriff was quiet for a long moment, his fingers drumming on the table. Finally he stood. All right, but we do this my way. No vigilante justice, no frontier revenge. We find evidence, we build a case, we arrest him, legal. Understood? Understood. Good. Now show me this body. They rode out to Finn's ranch together, Garrison and 2 deputies following. The storm had eased slightly enough to make travel possible, but miserable. Cold bit through every layer of clothing. Wind stung exposed skin. The horses struggled. At the cabin, Garrison examined Silas Marsh's frozen corpse with methodical care. He checked the pockets, studied the wounds, made notes. His face showed nothing. This is a Union soldier. The tattoo confirms it. So either Silas Marsh was using a false name, or someone killed the real Marsh and took his identity. Or both. Ruby crossed her arms against the cold. Victor could have killed Marsh, assumed his identity, then killed this soldier later and hidden the body here to muddy the trail. Possible. Garrison straightened. The question is, why store the body on Carroll's property? Why not dump it in the mines where it would never be found because he wanted it found eventually? Finn spoke from the doorway. He wanted to frame me. If this body surfaces, if questions get asked who looks guilty, the man whose land it is buried on. Smart. Garrison nodded slowly. Means this Victor is patient, plans ahead. That makes him more dangerous. So, what do? We search the mines. If Victor has been using Silas Marsh's identity, then Marsh's claim would be in the mining records. We find that claim, we find where he worked, maybe we find evidence. Maybe we find him. And if he runs, then we have the whole town watching. Blizzard has us trapped here for at least another week. He cannot leave any more than we can. So we use the time. We investigate. We narrow it down. And we catch him. It sounded simple, logical. But Ruby had been hunting Victor for too long to believe in simple solutions. He was always 3 steps ahead, always watching, always ready to kill anyone who got too close. She thought of Alice in the church cellar. Thought of Luke buried in frozen ground. Thought of Catherine 10 years cold in a grave back east. This ends here. Ruby's voice was quiet but absolute. Whatever it takes, however long, this ends. Garrison looked at her, and something in his expression shifted. Recognition, maybe. The look of one hunter seeing another. Yes, it does. They rode back to town as afternoon light faded. The investigation had begun. The trap was set. All they needed now was for Victor to step into it. But Victor Drummond had survived a war, survived a decade of pursuit, survived by being smarter and more ruthless than anyone hunting him. He would not make it easy. He would not make mistakes unless they forced him to. Ruby thought about this as they rode, thought about how to draw out a killer who had stayed hidden for 10 years. The answer came to her as they reached town, as lamplight flickered in windows and smoke rose from chimneys into the darkening sky. She would give him what he wanted. She would give him a target he could not resist. She would give him herself. That night she told Garrison her plan. He listened, his face grave. "It is too dangerous, I know. He will try to kill you. I am counting on it. And if we cannot stop him in time, then you will have his location. You can catch him before he kills anyone else." Finn, who had been listening from across the room, spoke up. "No, absolutely not. We find another way." "There is no other way." Ruby met his eyes. "Victor is too careful. He will not surface unless he thinks he has an advantage. So we give him one. We let him think I am alone, vulnerable, unprotected. And when he comes for me, we take him. You are talking about using yourself as bait. I have been bait for 10 years. This is just the first time I am doing it on purpose." The silence that followed felt heavy as snow. Finally, Garrison spoke. "If we do this, we do it with backup. Deputies watching. Armed, ready to move the second he appears." "Agreed. And you wear a weapon. Something hidden. In case we cannot reach you in time. I always do." She showed them the knife strapped to her forearm, the small pistol in her boot. Tools of survival she had carried since Catherine died. Finn looked at her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then he nodded once sharp. "When tomorrow night." Ruby had already planned it out. "I will be at the church, alone, paying respects to Alice. Victor cannot resist that kind of poetic justice. Killing me where his daughter lies, and we will be waiting." Yes, it was decided. The trap within the trap. Ruby would be the bait and Garrison's men would be the snare. Simple, clean, dangerous as hell. Ruby lay awake that night in the spare cabin, listening to wind and planning for death. Not her own. She had no intention of dying here, but Victor's death she could imagine in perfect detail, had been imagining it for a decade. Tomorrow night it might finally become real. In the main house, Finn sat by the fire watching flames and thinking about the woman in his spare cabin. She was not what he had expected when that first letter arrived, was not soft or frightened or in need of rescue. She was hard as winter iron, focused as a blade, hunting a ghost that most people would have given up on years ago. And tomorrow she was going to put herself in the path of a killer. He should stop her, should refuse to let her do this. But he knew that look in her eyes, the same look he had seen in mirrors after Luke died. The look of someone who would not stop until justice was done or they were dead trying. So he would not stop her. He would just make sure he was there when Victor came. Make sure she did not face him alone. In town, in the sheriff's office, Garrison sat making plans, positioning deputies, checking weapons, preparing for tomorrow night. And somewhere in the dark, in a place none of them could see, Victor Drummond watched and waited and smiled. Because he had seen this trap coming, had been expecting it, and he had already prepared his own response. Tomorrow night would bring blood. The question was whose. The storm picked up again near midnight. Snow fell thick and fast, erasing tracks, covering secrets, building walls of white that trapped everyone inside. The blizzard would last another week at least, maybe 2. Long enough for all of this to play out, long enough for the truth to surface terrible and final, long enough for Ruby Catherine Vale to face the man who had killed her sister, long enough for Finn Carroll to avenge his brother, long enough for Victor Drummond to make his last stand. The dead woman in the church cellar lay silent and still, her blade work precise, clean, her secrets buried with her. But the secrets would not stay buried. Blood had been spilled in the snow, and blood called for more blood. It always did. In the mountains, in the mines, in the frozen places where men went to hide from their pasts, the reckoning was coming. And when it came, not everyone would survive it. 16 days of winter. The blizzard did not stop. It continued through the second day, the third, the fourth. Snow fell in sheets that turned the world into a white void. Drifts climbed higher than a man's head. Roads disappeared. The stagecoach route became impassable. Telegraph lines went down under the weight of ice. Tin Cup, Colorado, vanished from the map, swallowed whole by winter. 47 people were trapped inside. One of them was a killer. Sheriff Garrison moved the townspeople into 3 main buildings for warmth and safety. The saloon with its cast-iron stove and stockpiled wood. The general store where Beatrice Cotton had enough supplies to feed everyone for a month if they were careful. And the church where Minister Brenner opened the doors to anyone who needed shelter. Families huddled together. Strangers became neighbors by necessity. Everyone watched everyone else. Ruby stayed at Finn's ranch. It was safer there, Garrison had decided. Isolated enough that Victor could not approach without being seen. Defendable. And Finn knew the land well enough to spot anything wrong. On the morning of the second day, Ruby examined Alice Drummond's belongings in detail. The trunk had been brought from the boarding house, its contents spread across the table in Finn's kitchen. Dresses carefully folded, a Bible with a ribbon marker, hairbrush and mirror. The ordinary possessions of a young woman starting a new life. But underneath, wrapped in a shawl, Ruby found the letters. There were 6 of them written in a careful hand on expensive paper. Ruby read them one by one, her expression growing harder with each page. They were signed, "Your loving father," but never with a full name. They spoke of reunion, of forgiveness, of a new beginning, in a place where the past did not matter. The last letter was different. It gave specific instructions. Come to Tin Cup, ask for the minister, tell no one your real reason for coming, use the mail-order bride arrangement as cover. I will find you when it is safe. Ruby set down the letters, her mind working. Victor had orchestrated everything, had brought his daughter here under false pretenses, used the bride arrangement to hide her true purpose. But why? What had he wanted from her? The answer came when she found the photograph. It was tucked into the Bible, pressed between pages like a flower. The image showed a young Alice, perhaps 16, standing beside a tall man whose face had been violently scratched out. But the scratches were fresh, done recently, maybe days before Alice died. And on the back, in Alice's handwriting, he promised he had changed. I wanted to believe him. I was wrong. Alice had come here hoping to reconcile with her father, had believed his letters, his promises of reform. And then she had seen the truth, had discovered what he really was, had tried to destroy his image literally and symbolically, and he had killed her for it. Ruby felt a cold fury settle in her chest. Victor Drummond had murdered his own daughter to protect his secrets, had cut her throat and left her in the snow like discarded trash. There was no bottom to his evil, no line he would not cross. She gathered the letters and photograph, brought them to Garrison at the church. The sheriff read through everything twice, his weathered face grim. This proves Alice knew who her father really was, proves she came here to confront him, but it does not tell us his current identity. No, but it tells us he is patient and manipulative. He spent months setting this up. convincing his daughter to come arranging the bride cover story. That takes planning, resources. He is not some desperate fugitive. He is comfortable here, established, which means he could be anyone. Ruby looked around the church at the families gathered for warmth, at the men playing cards in the corner, at the women cooking over makeshift stoves. Any one of them could be Victor, the friendly shopkeeper, the quiet miner, the devoted minister. He had hidden in plain sight for years, would continue hiding until they forced him out. We need to narrow the suspects. Ruby turned back to Garrison. Alice asked about 3 men specifically, Brenner Mercer and Silas Marsh. One of them is Victor, or one of them knows where he is. Garrison nodded slowly. I will bring them in for questioning, one at a time. See what shakes loose. Be careful. If Victor realizes we are closing in, he will run or kill again. Maybe both. I am always careful, Miss Vale. But the words felt hollow. They both knew careful was not enough against a man like Victor Drummond. The interrogations. Garrison started with Minister Brenner. The questioning took place in a side room of the church with Ruby and Finn watching from the doorway. Brenner sat straight-backed in a wooden chair, his lined face calm, despite the circumstances. I have nothing to hide, Sheriff. I will answer any question you have. You told Miss Vale you knew Victor Drummond during the war. Garrison's voice was measured. Tell me about that. There is not much to tell. Our units crossed paths briefly in Virginia early in the war. There was an ambush. Confederate soldiers surrounded us. Victor helped us escape. Saved my life and the lives of 3 other men. That was the only time I ever met him. And you never saw him again? Never. After the war, I came west to start fresh, put the violence behind me. I became a minister because I wanted to dedicate my life to peace, to making amends for the blood I had seen spilled. Yet you never mentioned this connection when Alice arrived asking questions. Brenner's calm cracked slightly. I did not see the relevance. A man I met once 15 years ago during wartime chaos. How could I know it was connected to that poor girl's murder because she specifically asked about Confederate veterans, because her father was Victor Drummond? Because you were one of 3 names she mentioned before she died. I understand how it looks. Brenner met Garrison's eyes. But I am not a murderer, Sheriff. I am a man of God. I spend my days comforting the sick and burying the dead. I do not create corpses. Can anyone confirm your whereabouts the night Alice died? I was alone in the church preparing Sunday's sermon. No one was with me, and the night Owen Pritchard died, again alone. Prayer and contemplation are solitary activities. Convenient. It is the truth. Garrison let him go unsatisfied. The minister's story was plausible but impossible to verify. He could be exactly what he claimed, or he could be lying with the practiced ease of someone who had spent years hiding in plain sight. Next came Dr. Isaac Mercer. The doctor arrived at the church office looking exhausted. His medical bag hung from one shoulder, and his clothes showed signs of a long night treating frostbite and illness among the townspeople. I expected this. Mercer sat down heavily. Given my history, I would suspect me too. Tell me about your history with Victor Drummond. Mercer was quiet for a long moment, gathering his thoughts. Then he spoke, his voice steady, despite the pain underneath. I was an Army surgeon during the war. Union side. We were stationed near a Confederate prisoner camp. The conditions there were unspeakable. Men starved. Men died from preventable diseases. And some men were tortured for information or simply for sport. Victor ran that camp. He did. I treated the prisoners who managed to escape, documented their injuries, collected testimony. After the war, I was called to testify at his trial. But the trial never happened. The charges were dropped. Political pressure from his family, from people who wanted the war forgotten. Victor disappeared before he could be arrested. I have been trying to find him ever since. Why? Mercer's hands tightened on his medical bag. Because 3 years ago, my wife was murdered. Throat cut. Same method as Alice Drummond, same method as Owen Pritchard. I knew then that Victor had found me, was punishing me for testifying against him. You have proof of this? No, just certainty. The kind that comes from knowing your enemy. Victor does not forgive, does not forget. If you cross him, he will find you eventually. It might take years, but he will find you. And you think he is here in Tin Cup, I know he is. I tracked him to Colorado 6 months ago. Heard about a Confederate veteran named Silas Marsh working the mines. I came to investigate. What did you find? Nothing conclusive. Marsh had died in a mine collapse the year before. But I found inconsistencies. Witnesses who described two different men using the same name. Claims still being worked when they should have been abandoned. Someone was using Marsh's identity. Did you confront this person? No. I was still gathering evidence when Alice arrived, and everything went to hell. Where were you the night she died? Tending to a miner with pneumonia. He can verify I was with him from sunset until dawn. And Owen Pritchard, alone in my office, organizing medical supplies. No alibi. Garrison made notes, his expression unreadable. One more question, Doctor. How well do you know Minister Brenner? Not well. We exchange pleasantries. I treat his congregation when they fall ill. Why? Because both of you claim connections to Victor Drummond. Both of you have medical knowledge that would make throat cutting easier. Both of you lack alibis for at least one murder. That makes you both suspects. Mercer stood, anger flashing in his eyes. I have dedicated my life to healing Sheriff, to undoing the damage men like Victor Drummond inflict. If you think I would become the very thing I have spent years fighting, then you do not understand me at all. I do not need to understand you, Doctor. I just need to find the truth. After Mercer left, Ruby spoke from the doorway. You believe him. It was not a question. Garrison looked up, surprised. What makes you say that? Because you did not push as hard with him as you did with Brenner. You gave him room to explain. You wanted to believe his story. Maybe I did. Garrison set down his pencil. Mercer lost his wife the same way you lost your sister. That kind of grief does not lie. Grief can also drive people to madness, to revenge, to becoming the very thing they hate. You think Mercer is Victor? I think anyone could be Victor. That is the problem. We are chasing a ghost who has had 10 years to build a perfect disguise. Garrison rubbed his weathered face. Then we keep digging, keep questioning, keep narrowing the field until we have our answer. And if the answer is someone we trust, then we deal with it. But we deal with it based on evidence, not suspicion. The second body, Owen Pritchard, died on the third day. The scream came at dawn, Beatrice Cotton's voice high and ragged, cutting through the morning stillness. Ruby was already awake, dressed, coffee in hand, when the sound reached Finn's ranch. They rode hard for town, arriving to find a crowd gathered in the alley behind the saloon. Owen lay in the snow, his throat opened like a second mouth. Blood had pooled beneath him, then frozen in the night cold. His eyes stared at nothing. His hands were curled into fists. But this time there was something else. Something clutched in his frozen right hand. A button. Brass tarnished with age. Confederate Army issue. Ruby knelt beside the body, examining it with practiced efficiency. The wound was identical to Alice's. Clean, professional, one cut from behind. But Owen had fought. His knuckles were scraped raw. There was skin under his fingernails, and the button had been torn from cloth, not dropped or placed deliberately. He grabbed his attacker. Ruby pointed to the evidence, tried to hold on. The button came off during the struggle. Garrison crouched beside her, which means the killer wore Confederate memorabilia, or kept it as a trophy, or wanted us to think he did. Finn stood over them, his expression dark. This feels staged, too obvious. Maybe. Ruby stood, brushed snow from her knees. Or maybe Owen finally pushed too hard, asked the wrong questions, threatened the wrong person. They searched Owen's room above the saloon, found chaos, furniture overturned, drawers pulled out and dumped, papers scattered across the floor. Someone had been looking for something, had torn the place apart in their search. Finn picked up an overturned strongbox. The lock was broken, inside empty. Whatever Owen had, they took it. Ruby examined the papers on the floor. Most were receipts, ledgers showing money owed and money paid. The ordinary business of running a saloon. But one document stood out. A letter crumpled and stained, written in Owen's hasty scrawl. She smoothed it out, read it aloud. I know who you are. I know what you did during the war. I know about the camp and the prisoners and the things you want buried. If you want me to stay quiet, bring $500 to the alley tonight. Come alone. Tell no one. This is your only chance. It was unsigned, unsent. A draft, maybe, or a copy Owen kept for insurance. He was blackmailing the killer. Garrison took the letter, studied it, saw something or heard something that gave him leverage. And the killer decided silence was cheaper, bought with a knife than with money. When was this written? Ruby checked the date scrawled at the top. 2 days ago, the day after Alice died. So Owen witnessed something the night Alice was murdered. Something that identified the killer. He tried to profit from it, and it got him killed. The question is what he saw. Finn moved to the window, looked down at the alley below. From this vantage point you could see across the street to the boarding house, to the room Alice had rented. He saw her with someone. Ruby joined Finn at the window, saw them together, maybe arguing, maybe struggling, and he recognized who it was. Then, where is his statement? Where is the detailed account any good blackmailer would keep as insurance? Taken. Whoever killed Owen took it when they searched this room. That is what they were looking for. Evidence, proof, anything that could identify them. They spent 2 hours searching, found nothing more. Whoever had killed Owen had been thorough, had taken everything that mattered, and left only empty rooms and unanswered questions. Ruby stood in the destroyed room, frustration building in her chest. They were close. She could feel it. The killer was panicking, making mistakes. The button left behind. The obvious search of Owen's room. These were the actions of someone feeling cornered. But cornered animals were the most dangerous kind. The quiet hours. Night fell early as it always did in winter. Ruby returned to Finn's ranch as darkness swallowed the mountains. She found him in the barn tending to his horses with methodical care. The familiar rhythm of brush against hide, the soft sounds of animals at rest. It was peaceful in a way the rest of the world was not. You do not have to stay out here. Finn spoke without turning. The house is warmer. I know. But sometimes I need the quiet. Need to think without people asking questions or demanding answers. Finn set down his brush, turned to face her. What are you thinking about? Ruby leaned against a stall door. About how many people Victor has killed. About how many more he will kill if we do not stop him. About whether I have been chasing a ghost for so long I would not recognize the real man if he stood in front of me. You would recognize him. How can you be sure? Because you are still alive. If he did not see you as a threat, if he thought you were just another confused woman chasing shadows, he would have ignored you. But he knows you are dangerous, knows you are close. That is why he brought you here, not to kill you quickly, but to toy with you first. That is not comforting. It should be. It means you are winning. He would not play games if he felt secure. Ruby was quiet for a moment. Then she spoke, her voice softer. Tell me about your wife, about Sarah. You never talk about her. Finn's face changed, not closed exactly, just careful, guarded in the way people get when touching old wounds. What do you want to know? What was she like? He was quiet so long, Ruby thought he would not answer. Then he moved to the barn door, looked out at the snow-covered darkness beyond. She was kind, that is what I remember most. She could find good in anyone, even people who did not deserve it. She used to leave food on the porch for drifters passing through, used to visit sick neighbors even when we could barely afford the time. She made the world softer just by being in it. You loved her very much. I did. Still do in a way. You do not stop loving someone just because they die. You just learn to carry it different. Ruby joined him at the door, stood close enough to feel the warmth from his body in the freezing air. How did she die? The real story, not the one you tell strangers. Finn was silent for a long time. When he spoke, his voice was rough with old pain. She was 8 months pregnant. I was away selling horses, trying to make enough money to expand the ranch. Grace was supposed to check on her, but there was a storm. Roads closed. Sarah went into labor alone. Something went wrong. Bleeding that would not stop. By the time I got back 3 days later, she and the baby were already buried. I am sorry. Everyone is sorry. It does not change anything. No, it does not. They stood together in the barn doorway, two people who understood that some losses never heal. They just become part of who you are, part of what drives you forward when everything else says to stop. Finn turned to look at her. His hazel eyes were steady in the lamplight. You asked what she was like. Now I am asking about your sister, about Catherine. You chase her, kill her, but you never talk about her." Ruby felt the familiar tightness in her chest, the one that came whenever Catherine's name was spoken aloud. She was everything I was not, warm where I was cold, patient where I was quick to anger. She wanted to save everyone. I just wanted to survive. But you both became nurses. Because of her, she convinced me we could make a difference. That healing mattered more than killing even during war. I thought she was naive, thought her kindness would get her hurt. It did. Yes, it did. Ruby's voice went flat. She helped prisoners escape from Victor's camp, got caught. He made an example of her. Cut her throat in front of the men she had saved so they would know the price of defiance. How do you know this? Were you there? No. But one of the prisoners she saved found me after the war, told me everything, described how she died, how she looked at Victor in those final moments without fear, without regret. She died believing she had done the right thing. And you have spent 10 years making sure her death meant something. I have spent 10 years trying to kill the man who murdered her. Whether that means something or not, I do not know anymore. Finn reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away. When she did not, his calloused hand covered hers on the doorframe. It means something. Holding evil accountable matters, even when it cannot undo the harm. Ruby looked down at their hands. His were larger, rougher, marked with scars from ranch work and hard living. Hers were smaller, but equally scarred. The mark on her right palm shone white in the lamplight. How did you get that? Finn nodded toward the scar. Ruby pulled her hand back, curled her fingers to hide it. A knife. During the war. A soldier we were treating woke up confused, thought we were the enemy. Grabbed a scalpel. I blocked with my hand instead of my throat. Smart? Lucky. If he had been faster or I had been slower, I would be dead. But you are not. Number one, I am not. They stood in comfortable silence for a while, the kind of quiet that did not need filling. Outside, wind howled through the pines. Inside the barn, horses shifted in their stalls. The lamp flame flickered. Finally, Ruby spoke again. Tomorrow we set the trap. I go to the church alone. We wait for Victor to come. And if he does not, then we think of something else. But he will come. I know him. He cannot resist the chance to finish what he started 10 years ago. Finn turned to face her fully. His expression was serious. I do not like this plan. Too many things can go wrong. Too many ways for you to get hurt. I know. But it is the best chance we have. The only way to draw him out. There has to be another way. There is not. We have tried investigation. We have tried narrowing suspects. We have tried everything except giving him what he wants. So that is what we do. We give him a target he cannot resist. You, me. And if we cannot save you in time, Ruby met his eyes, held his gaze without flinching. Then you make sure my death is not for nothing. You catch him. You end him. You make sure he never kills anyone else. Finn's jaw tightened. I am not letting you die. You may not have a choice. The hell I do not. He stepped closer. Close enough that Ruby could see the flecks of gold in his hazel eyes. Close enough to feel his breath on her face. I have lost enough people, Ruby. I am not losing you too. You barely know me. I know enough. I know you are brave and stubborn and willing to die for something you believe in. I know you have been alone so long you have forgotten what it feels like to have someone stand with you. I know you think this hunt is all you have left, but it is not. It is not. What else is there? This us, whatever this is becoming. Ruby felt something crack inside her, some wall she had built years ago to keep the world at a safe distance. She wanted to step back, to rebuild the barrier, to protect herself from the terrible vulnerability of letting someone matter. But she did not step back. Instead, she reached up and touched his face, felt the roughness of his beard under her palm, felt the warmth of his skin, felt the realness of another human being choosing to stand beside her in the dark. Finn covered her hand with his own, did not pull it away, did not push for more, just held it there, gentle and firm at the same time. If we do this, Ruby said quietly, if we let this become something and Victor kills me tomorrow, it will destroy you. Just like losing Sarah did. I do not want to do that to you. Then do not die. I will try very hard not to. That is all I am asking. They stood like that for a long moment. on the edge of something that could be beautiful or terrible, or both, neither knowing which way it would fall. Finally, Ruby lowered her hand, stepped back. The space between them felt cold. I should sleep. Tomorrow will be difficult. Yes, it will. She walked to the door, stopped with her hand on the frame. Finn, thank you. For listening. For standing with me. For making me remember. There are things worth living for beyond revenge. You are welcome. She left the barn, crossed through deep snow to the spare cabin. Inside, she barred the door and lay down fully dressed with her weapons close at hand. Sleep would not come easily. Too many thoughts, too many fears. But underneath the fear was something else. Something warm and fragile and terrifying. Hope. The fire. The blaze started near midnight. Ruby woke to the smell of smoke, grabbed her coat and weapons, and ran outside to find the sky lit orange. The general store was burning. Flames climbed high into the night, throwing wild shadows across the snow. Even from Finn's ranch 3 miles away, she could see the inferno. They rode hard for town. By the time they arrived, half the building was engulfed. People formed bucket lines from the well, throwing water that evaporated before it touched the flames. Beatrice Cotton stood in the street, her face streaked with soot and tears, watching her livelihood die. The supplies. She kept saying it over and over. All the food, all the medicine, everything we need to survive. It is all burning. Garrison appeared through the smoke, his weathered face grim. Was anyone inside, Number? The store was empty. We got lucky. Lucky. Ruby stared at the flames. This was not luck. This was deliberate. How do you know? Because fires do not start themselves in winter. Because someone wanted our food supplies destroyed. Someone who benefits from chaos and desperation. Garrison's expression hardened. You think this is Victor? I know it is. He is escalating. Killing individuals was not enough. Now he wants to destabilize the entire town, make everyone afraid, make everyone suspect each other. Why? Because frightened people make mistakes, reveal secrets, turn on each other, and in that chaos, he can move freely, can strike without being noticed. The fire burned through the night. By dawn, the general store was a blackened skeleton. The supplies were ash. And the town's fear had solidified into something harder and more dangerous. Panic. Beatrice did quick calculations as people gathered in the church. With what remains in private homes and the saloon stores, we have food for 3 weeks. Maybe 4 if we ration strictly. After that, we starve. Can we send someone for help? A woman asked. Ride to the nearest town. Garrison shook his head. The pass is still snowed shut. Will be for at least another week, maybe 2. No one is getting in or out. Then we are trapped here, with a killer, with dwindling supplies, with winter getting worse. The panic rippled through the crowd. Ruby watched it spread, watched fear turn to anger, watched neighbors who had shared meals yesterday eye each other with suspicion today. This was Victor's plan. Divide and conquer. Let fear do his work for him. She stood, her voice cutting through the growing chaos. Listen to me. All of you, this is exactly what the killer wants. He wants us frightened. He wants us turning on each other. He wants chaos because chaos helps him hide. So we do not give it to him. We stay calm. We ration carefully. We watch out for each other. And we catch this bastard before he can kill again. Pretty words, Miss Vale. A miner called out. But words do not put food on the table. Words do not stop a killer. No. Evidence does. Action does. And we have both. We know the killer is connected to Victor Drummond. We know he is someone established in this town, someone with access and authority. We are close to identifying him. We just need a little more time. How much more time? The miner pushed. How many more bodies? As few as possible. Ruby met his eyes. But I will not lie to you. There may be more deaths before this ends. The only question is whether we face that reality together or let it tear us apart. The crowd murmured, but settled slightly. Fear was still there, thick as the smoke that lingered in the air. But panic had eased, for now. Tem Moribakdo. A voice spoke from the back of the room, quiet but clear enough to carry. My stores are available. Heads turned. Warren Hayes stood near the door, having entered so quietly no one had noticed. He looked at Beatrice, his expression concerned but controlled. I keep emergency supplies in my office. Dried goods, flour, salt, coffee. Enough for perhaps 20 people for a week if rationed carefully. You are welcome to it. The offer hung in the air, generous, unexpectedly so. Beatrice's face showed surprise. That is very kind of you, Mr. Hayes. We may need to take you up on that. Of course, Hayes inclined his head. We are all in this together. Survival requires community. He said it with such sincerity that several people nodded agreement, but Ruby watched his eyes. They moved across the room with careful precision, cataloging who spoke, who stayed silent, who showed fear, measuring reactions like a scientist observing an experiment. Thank you, Warren. Garrison's voice held genuine gratitude. Good to know we have options. Hayes acknowledged this with a small smile, then turned to leave. As he passed Ruby, their eyes met for a fraction of a second. His gaze was steady, unreadable. Then he was gone, the door closing softly behind him. Ruby felt Finn shift beside her. He leaned close, voice low. Something about that man bothers me. Me too. Ruby kept her voice equally quiet. Too generous, too calm. Everyone else is panicking, and he is offering supplies like it costs him nothing. Maybe he is just a good man trying to help. Maybe. But Ruby had learned long ago to trust her instincts, and every instinct she had was screaming that Warren Hayes was not what he appeared to be. Garrison pulled Ruby aside after the meeting dispersed. You should not make promises you cannot keep. I did not promise anything. I told them the truth. We are close. We just need one more piece of evidence, one more mistake from Victor, and if he does not make one, then we force him to. How with the trap? Tomorrow night. I go to the church alone and we wait. After the fire, you still want to do this? Especially after the fire. Ruby's voice was hard. Victor is getting desperate, making big moves. That means he is afraid we are closing in. We use that fear. We give him a target he thinks he can take. And when he commits, we end him. You are betting your life on this. I have been betting my life on this for 10 years. Tomorrow is just the first time I am doing it with backup. Garrison studied her for a long moment. Then he nodded. All right, we do it your way. But I am positioning men all around that church. The second he appears, we take him. No speeches, no confrontations. We just end it. Agreed. They spent the rest of the day preparing. Finn positioned himself where he could see the church entrance. Garrison placed deputies in concealed spots around the building. Ruby checked her weapons, the knife in her sleeve, the small pistol in her boot, tools she had carried since Catherine died. As sunset approached, as the sky turned from white to gray to black, Ruby walked alone through the snow toward the church. She could feel eyes watching, could sense Victor out there somewhere deciding whether to take the bait. She entered the church, lit a single lamp, knelt beside Alice Drummond's coffin in the back room where they kept the dead. The girl lay peaceful, her blonde hair arranged carefully around her face. Someone had dressed her in the wedding gown she had died in, the one she had put on, hoping for a new life. I am sorry, Ruby spoke quietly. Sorry I did not save you. Sorry your father was a monster. Sorry you died still hoping he could change. The church was silent except for wind outside. Ruby waited. 1 hour passed. 2. The lamp oil burned low. Shadows grew longer. Still, no one came. She stood frustrated. The trap had failed. Victor was too smart, too careful. He had sensed the ambush and stayed away. Ruby was turning to leave when she heard it. A sound from the main sanctuary. Footsteps on wood. She drew her knife, moved silently toward the door. The sanctuary was dark. The lamp she had left burning was out. Smoke still rose from the wick. Someone was here, in the darkness, waiting. Ruby stepped forward slowly, her eyes adjusting. She could make out shapes now. The pews, the altar, the cross on the wall, and a figure standing near the door. Tall, broad-shouldered, holding something that glinted in the faint moonlight filtering through windows. A knife. Ruby raised her own blade. Her heart hammered, but her hands stayed steady. Victor. The figure moved, not toward her, toward the door, escaping. Ruby ran after him, burst out into the snow and darkness, saw the figure running toward the edge of town, toward the mines. She gave chase. Behind her shouts, Finn and Garrison and the deputies converging, but Ruby was faster. Younger, driven by 10 years of rage, she followed the figure into the mine entrance, into darkness that swallowed light, into tunnels that twisted like a maze. Her lamp threw wild shadows. Her breathing echoed off stone walls. Ahead, the sound of running feet. She went deeper, level after level, following the sound, following her instinct, until she reached a chamber and the footsteps stopped. Ruby raised her lamp, looked around. Empty. The chamber was empty. She had lost him. No, not lost, trapped. Because behind her back, the way she had come, she heard it. The sound of supports breaking, of stone shifting, of a cave in starting. Victor had led her here deliberately, had trapped her in a chamber he had already prepared to collapse. The ceiling began to fall. Ruby ran, threw herself back toward the entrance as rock and timber crashed down behind her, the tunnel filled with dust and debris. She could not see, could barely breathe, could only run and pray she was going the right way. Light ahead, blessed light. The entrance. She burst out into open air as the tunnel behind her collapsed completely, fell to her knees in the snow, gasping and coughing. Finn reached her first, pulled her up, checked her for injuries. "Are you hurt?" "No, just—" She coughed again, spat out dust, just angry, because she had been played. Victor had used the trap against her, had lured her into the mines and tried to bury her alive. And he had almost succeeded. Garrison arrived breathing hard. "Did you see him? Did you see who it was?" "No, too dark, too fast." Ruby wiped blood from a cut on her forehead. But he knew about the trap, knew exactly where everyone was positioned, knew how to avoid you all and get to me, which means he was watching, planning, waiting for the perfect moment. Or he is one of us. Finn's voice was hard. One of the people who knew about the trap, who helped plan it. They all looked at each other. The terrible realization settling in. Victor was not some outsider hiding in shadows. He was among them, had been all along. Someone they trusted, someone with authority, someone who knew every move they made before they made it. And that someone had just tried to kill Ruby. The question was who, and they had until morning to figure it out, because Ruby knew with cold certainty that Victor would not wait anymore, would not play games. Tomorrow someone would die. And unless they found him first, that someone might be her. The fourth body, Minister Jacob Brenner, was found at dawn on the seventh day. He hung from the church bell tower rope around his neck, feet dangling 6 inches above the snow that had drifted against the building. His face was purple tongue, protruding eyes bulged and frozen. But it was not the hanging that had killed him. His throat had been cut first. Ruby stood in the snow, looking up at the body, her mind racing through implications. Garrison had examined Brenner just 2 days ago. The minister had been cooperative, nervous, but alive. Now he swung in the wind like a grotesque bell clapper, and everything they thought they knew had just shattered. Finn appeared beside her, his face grim. "This changes everything." "Yes, it does." Ruby's voice was flat. "If Brenner is dead, then he was not Victor, which means we have been chasing the wrong man, or Victor wants us to think that." "No." Ruby shook her head. "Brenner was genuinely frightened during questioning, genuinely confused. He was not a skilled enough actor to fake that level of terror. He was innocent. And now he is dead because Victor saw him as a threat. A threat to what? To Victor's real identity. They cut down the body with help from townspeople who had gathered. Beatrice Cotton stood at the front of the crowd, her face hard as the frozen ground. 4 dead now, her voice carried across the churchyard. "Alice Owen Garrison Brenner, how many more before we do something? We are doing something." Garrison's deputy, a young man named Thomas Webb, stepped forward. "We are investigating." "Investigating." Beatrice spat the word like poison. "While we investigate, people die. While we gather evidence, families bury loved ones. This has to stop. It will." Ruby met her eyes. "But we have to be smart about it. Victor wants us panicked, wants us making mistakes. We do not give him that satisfaction. Easy for you to say. You are not from here. You can leave when this is over. We have to live with what happens. Then help us end it properly." Ruby's voice hardened. "Help us catch him so he faces justice, so everyone sees what he is, so no one can ever say we were wrong." The crowd murmured. Some nodded. Others looked unconvinced. Fear and anger made a dangerous combination, and Ruby could feel both simmering just beneath the surface. Inside the church they laid Brenner's body beside the others. 4 coffins now waiting for spring burial. The cellar had become a morgue. Ruby examined the wound with clinical precision, same method as the others, clean professional, left to right. But something was different this time. She checked Brenner's hands, found what she was looking for. He fought back. She showed Finn, skin under his nails. And look at this. She pointed to bruising on Brenner's knuckles. He punched his attacker, hard enough to leave marks. So somewhere in this town, someone has a fresh bruise, possibly a black eye or split lip, or they are skilled enough to avoid the blow. Ruby stood. But it gives us something, a timeline. Brenner was alive yesterday evening. Multiple people saw him at supper. He died sometime between midnight and dawn. That narrows our window and our suspect list. Finn crossed his arms. Who was not accounted for during those hours? Everyone. It was night. People were in their homes. No one has an alibi for midnight. Then we look at who had opportunity. Who could move around town without being noticed? Who had access to rope and the church tower? Ruby walked to the window, looked out at the town. 47 people, minus the 4 dead. 43 left. One of them was Victor Drummond. We have been thinking about this wrong. She spoke slowly, working it through. We assumed Victor would be someone with obvious Confederate connections, a veteran who served in the war. But what if he is someone who erased that past completely? How by creating a new identity from nothing? Not stealing someone else's name like we thought with Silas Marsh, but building a fictional person, someone with no history before arriving in Tin Cup. Finn considered this. That would require money, resources, time to establish credibility, all of which Victor would have. His family was wealthy. He would have access to funds even after the war. Ruby turned back to face him. We need to look at everyone who arrived in Tin Cup within the last 5 years. Anyone whose background cannot be verified, anyone who came from nowhere. That could still be dozens of people. This is the frontier. Half the population is running from something. Then we start with those who have skills Victor would need. Medical knowledge for the precise throat cuts. Mining knowledge to navigate the tunnels. Business sense to maintain a legitimate cover. The assayer. The realization came to Ruby in the middle of the night. She sat up in bed in the spare cabin, her mind suddenly crystal clear. Mercer had mentioned it days ago. The man who bought ore from Silas Marsh's claim. The one who came once a month. Distinguished-looking gray-haired with scars on his hands. The assayer. Warren Hayes. Ruby had seen him around town, but never paid close attention. He kept to himself. Mostly ran his business from a small office near the mining claims office. Miners brought him ore samples. He tested them, determined value, paid fair prices. He was quiet, professional, respected, and she knew almost nothing about him. She dressed quickly, grabbed her knife and pistol, crossed through snow to the main house. Found Finn already awake, sitting by the fire with his rifle across his lap. You could not sleep either. He said it as fact, not question. Warren Hayes. When did he arrive in Tin Cup? Finn thought back. 3 years ago, maybe 4. Opened the assayer's office when old man Hutchins retired. Why? What do you know about him, his background, where he came from? Nothing. He keeps to himself, does good work, pays fair, never causes trouble. Never causes trouble, Ruby repeated, or never gets caught causing trouble. What if Hayes is Victor? Based on what evidence? Based on the fact that he is the only person in town with verified contact with Silas Marsh, based on the fact that an assayer would have reason to go into the mines regularly, would understand the tunnel systems, would have access to tools sharp enough for precise cuts. Ruby paced, her mind working. And based on the fact that we know nothing about his past. He appeared here fully formed with money and skills and no verifiable history. That describes half the men in this territory. Then we verify it. We search his office, his living quarters. We find proof. And if we are wrong, if Hayes is innocent, and we break into his property, then we apologize. But if we are right, and we wait, someone else dies. Finn stood, checked his rifle. Then we do it now, before dawn, before anyone sees us. They woke. Grace brought her into the plan. She would watch the main street signal if Hayes left his rooms above the assayer's office. Finn and Ruby would search the office itself. The town was dark and silent at 4 in the morning. Snow fell lightly, muffling their footsteps. Ruby picked the lock on the assayer's office door with tools she had carried since the war. The mechanism clicked open. Inside, everything was orderly. Neat rows of testing equipment, scales for weighing ore, chemical solutions in labeled bottles, a desk with ledgers showing purchases and sales. Nothing immediately suspicious. Ruby searched systematically. Checked drawers, looked for false bottoms, examined every paper. Finn went through the back room where Hayes kept samples and equipment. It was Finn who found it. "Ruby, come here." She joined him in the back room. He stood in front of a locked cabinet, the door now forced open. Inside, instead of ore samples, were personal items. A Confederate officer's uniform, carefully preserved. A journal with dates going back to the war. And underneath everything, a wooden box. Finn opened the box. Inside were trophies. A wedding ring, a military medal, a pocket watch, small personal items that meant nothing to anyone except their original owners. Alice's ring. Ruby picked it up, felt the cold metal. Owen's medal. She checked the watch. Luke's initials engraved on the back. "These are from his victims." Finn's voice was hard. "He keeps them as souvenirs." Ruby opened the journal, read entries by lamplight. Dates, names, methods. A meticulous record of murder spanning 15 years. And on the first page, in careful script, property of Captain Victor Drummond, 3rd Virginia Cavalry. "We have him." Ruby closed the journal, slipped it into her coat pocket. "This is proof. Documented evidence. We take this to Webb to the Territorial Marshal when he arrives and Victor hangs. Suabatno today." She was reaching for the trophies when light flickered through the window. Faint, distant, but unmistakable. Finn moved to look outside, keeping to the shadows. His body went rigid. "Someone is coming." Lamplight moving up the street from the direction of Hayes's rooms. Ruby's heart hammered. How long? 30 seconds, maybe less. They had no time. The forced cabinet lock was visible, the trophies scattered. Anyone entering would know immediately that the office had been searched. Back room. Finn extinguished their lamp, moved toward the rear door. "No," Ruby grabbed his arm. "If we run, he will know we found evidence. We'll destroy everything, disappear before we can get help. We stay. We confront him." "Ruby, we stay." The footsteps were on the stairs now, slow, measured. Someone who had seen their light from his window and come to investigate. Someone who knew exactly what was in that cabinet and what it would mean if discovered. Finn positioned himself by the door rifle, ready. Ruby drew her knife, kept the journal hidden in her coat. Her pulse thundered, but her hands stayed steady. The office door opened slowly. They froze. Someone was coming. Finn doused the lamp, moved to the door. Ruby pocketed the journal, gripped her knife. The office door opened. A figure stepped inside, struck a match, lit a lamp on the desk. Warren Hayes stood in the lamplight, looking directly at them through the open back room door. He was 50, something gray-haired as described, with a lean face and cold eyes. He wore a gentleman's coat and carried a walking stick with a silver handle. When he spoke, his voice was cultured, calm. "Miss Vale, Mr. Carroll, I wondered when you would figure it out." The confrontation. Ruby stepped into the office, proper knife ready. Finn followed, rifle raised. "Victor Drummond." Hayes, or rather, Victor smiled. It was not a pleasant expression. "Warren Hayes died 4 years ago of a heart condition. I inherited his business, his reputation, his life. It was remarkably easy. No family to question the transition. No friends close enough to notice subtle differences. The frontier is very forgiving of reinvention. You killed him." I eased his passing. Victor set down his walking stick. He was dying anyway. I simply accelerated the timeline and assumed his identity, much cleaner than what I did to poor Silas Marsh. And Brenner Ruby kept her distance, circled slowly. Why kill him? Because he remembered me from the war. Not well, but enough. When Alice started asking questions when you arrived following your little crusade, I saw the pieces connecting. Brenner was a liability. He had to go. You killed your own daughter. Alice was foolish. Victor's voice went cold. She came here thinking I had reformed, that fatherhood meant something to me. She discovered otherwise and became a threat. I eliminated the threat. Finn's finger moved to the trigger. Give me one reason not to shoot you right now. Because you want justice, not murder. Victor's smile returned. You want me to stand trial, to be publicly convicted and executed. Shooting me here in the dark would make you No better than me. I can live with that. But can Miss Vale? Victor looked at Ruby. She has spent 10 years hunting me legally. Will she throw away her principles for revenge? Will she let you become a murderer to satisfy her need for justice? Ruby met Victor's eyes. She thought about Catherine, about Alice, about all the victims whose trophies sat in that cabinet. She thought about pulling her own trigger, ending this here and now. Then she lowered her knife. No, we take him to trial. We do this right. Victor laughed. Still the righteous one, just like your sister. Do not speak about her. Why not? She was sanctimonious too, thought she could save the world one prisoner at a time. I enjoyed proving her wrong. Ruby's hand tightened on the knife. Finn saw it stepped between them. He wants you angry, wants you to make a mistake. Do not give him the satisfaction. Victor sighed theatrically. Well, this has been enlightening. But I am afraid I cannot allow you to arrest me. I have worked too hard building this life to surrender it to frontier justice. His hand moved toward his coat. Finn fired. The bullet struck Victor's shoulder, spun him around. The pistol he had been reaching for clattered to the floor. Victor stumbled, caught himself on the desk, blood spreading across his shirt. You shot me. He sounded genuinely surprised. You reached for a weapon. Finn's voice was steady. I stopped you. I am unarmed now. Good. Then you will live to hang. Outside shouts. The gunshot had woken people. Footsteps ran toward the assayer's office. Grace burst in first, followed by Beatrice, by townspeople drawn by the noise. They stopped, taking in the scene. Victor bleeding. Ruby and Finn standing over him, the open cabinet with its horrible contents visible. Is that? Beatrice stepped closer, saw the trophies. Oh, God. Those are from the victims. Warren Hayes is Victor Drummond. Ruby's voice carried to everyone present. We have proof. His journal documenting murders, personal effects from Alice Owen Luke, everything needed to convict him. The crowd pressed closer. Ruby saw anger building, saw hands reaching for weapons, saw the thin line between justice and mob violence. We take him to the church, she spoke loudly, firmly. We lock him up. We send for the territorial marshal. We do this legally. Why wait? A miner pushed forward. We can hang him now, save the territory the expense, because that is what he wants. Ruby pointed at Victor. He wants us to become killers, wants to drag us down to his level. We do not give him that victory. Beatrice stepped beside Ruby. She is right. We do it proper. We show everyone, including him, that justice exists even out here. The crowd hesitated. The moment balanced on a knife's edge. Then Grace spoke. My brother Luke died to expose this man. His death meant something because he tried to do the right thing. We honor that by finishing what he started, legally, properly. The tension broke. Men lowered their weapons. The mob became a community again. They locked Victor in the church cellar with the bodies of his victims. Fitting justice, Ruby thought. Let him spend his final days surrounded by what he had done. Webb sent riders to the nearest marshal's station despite the snow. The territorial judge arrived 5 days later, traveling through partially cleared passes with an escort of federal deputies. The trial began on the 14th day of winter. They held it in the church, the only building large enough to hold everyone. The judge, a severe man named Aldrich, presided from the pulpit. Victor sat in a chair facing the congregation, his hands and feet shackled, his shoulder bandaged. He looked calm, almost serene. Ruby sat in the front row beside Finn and Grace. Behind them, the entire town had gathered. This was their justice, too, their chance to see evil named and judged. The prosecution presented evidence methodically, the journal documenting murders, the trophies matched to victims, testimony from Ruby about Victor's war crimes, about Catherine's death, about the 10-year hunt that had led here. Victor's appointed defense attorney, a young man from Denver, tried to argue mistaken identity, insufficient evidence, coerced confession. None of it held weight against the physical proof. On the third day, Ruby took the stand. The prosecutor, a territorial attorney named Graves, asked her to describe Catherine's death. Ruby spoke steadily, her voice never wavering. Told how Catherine had helped prisoners escape, how Victor had discovered it, how he had executed her in front of the men she had saved as a lesson. The courtroom was silent when she finished. Graves turned to Victor. Does the defendant wish to dispute this testimony? Victor stood slowly, chains clinking. I do not dispute it. I remember Miss Catherine Vale very clearly. She was young, idealistic, foolish. She thought compassion mattered more than survival. I taught her otherwise. The courtroom erupted. Judge Aldrich pounded his gavel, calling for order. You admit to murdering a Union nurse during wartime, Graves pressed. I admit to executing a traitor who aided enemy combatants. Victor's voice was calm. I was following my conscience and my duty as a Confederate officer, by cutting her throat, by eliminating a threat. The method was expedient. Ruby felt Finn's hand on hers, grounding her. She wanted to leap across the room, wanted to drive her knife into Victor's chest, but she stayed seated, stayed silent. Let the law do what she could not. On the fourth day, Grace testified about Luke's death, described finding his body near the mine, described the years of grief of wondering who had killed her brother and why. Victor listened with apparent interest. When asked if he had killed Luke Carroll, he shrugged. I have killed many people. If Luke Carroll discovered information that threatened me, then yes, I likely eliminated him. I do not keep careful count of such things. The callousness stunned the courtroom into silence. The prosecutor called final witnesses. Beatrice described finding Owen's body. Webb described examining Garrison's corpse. A miner who had known Silas Marsh testified that the real Marsh had been a gentle man, nothing like the cold professional who had later used his name. On the fifth day, closing arguments. The defense attorney made a half-hearted attempt to suggest reasonable doubt, to argue that memory and emotion had colored testimony, that physical evidence could be interpreted multiple ways. No one believed him. Even he seemed unconvinced by his own words. Graves stood for the prosecution, pointed to Victor. This man is a war criminal who has evaded justice for 15 years. He has murdered Union soldiers, his own daughter, innocent townspeople. He has shown no remorse, no humanity, no recognition that his actions were wrong. The evidence is overwhelming. The crimes are proven. Justice demands conviction and execution. Judge Aldrich sent the jury to deliberate. They were back in 20 minutes, guilty on all counts. The judge looked at Victor. Do you have anything to say before I pass sentence? Victor stood, looked around the courtroom. His eyes found Ruby. I regret nothing. His voice was clear-carrying. I did what was necessary to survive, to thrive. I am not ashamed of my actions. I am only disappointed that lesser minds cannot understand the necessity of strength over sentiment. He turned to the judge. I know you will sentence me to hang. That is your right under law. But understand this, I am not afraid. Death holds no terror for a man who has faced it 1,000 times and never blinked. You can kill my body, but you cannot diminish what I am. Judge Aldrich's expression was stone. Victor Drummond, I sentence you to be hanged by the neck until dead. Sentence to be carried out 3 days hence. May God have mercy on your soul, for this court has none. The days between, Ruby did not visit Victor in the cellar. She had nothing to say to him, but Grace did. On the evening before the execution, Grace descended the stairs with a lamp and a chair, sat facing Victor through the bars. He watched her with mild curiosity. You are the sister. Luke's blood. I am. Come to curse me, to demand answers. No. Grace set the lamp down. I came to tell you that Luke's death was not meaningless. He found your hiding place, found evidence of your crimes. And even though you killed him for it, the evidence survived. His death led directly to your capture. How poetic. More than poetic, true. Luke died doing the right thing. What will you die for? Victor smiled. I will die for being smarter than everyone else. For refusing to pretend that morality matters more than survival. For living exactly as I chose without apology. Then you will die alone and unmourned. I expected nothing else. Grace stood, picked up her lamp. Tomorrow, when they put the rope around your neck, I will watch. And when you drop, when your neck breaks, I will feel nothing. Not satisfaction, not grief, just relief that you are gone from the world. I am sure that will comfort you. It will. Because, unlike you, I can still feel something, even if it is just relief. You died inside long before tomorrow. You just do not know it yet. She left him in the darkness. Finn found Ruby that night in the barn, brushing down horses with methodical precision. Her hands moved automatically, her mind elsewhere. "Are you all right?" she continued, brushing. "I thought I would feel different, triumphant, satisfied. Something, but I just feel empty. That will pass." "Will it?" Ruby set down the brush. 10 years I hunted him. 10 years my life was defined by finding Victor Drummond and making him pay for Catherine's death. Now he is caught, convicted, about to die, and I feel nothing." Finn moved closer, stood beside her in the quiet darkness. Maybe that is the point. Maybe justice is not supposed to feel like anything. It just is. Then what do I do now? Who am I, if not Catherine's avenging sister? You are Ruby, a skilled nurse, a brave woman. Someone who spent a decade refusing to give up when most people would have stopped after a year. Finn's voice was gentle. You are not defined by him anymore. You can be whoever you choose. I do not know how to choose. I only know how to hunt, then learn. We learn together. Ruby leaned against him. Let herself be held. Let herself feel the warmth of another person without flinching away. It was hard, foreign, but not unwelcome. Tomorrow he dies. Her voice was barely a whisper. Tomorrow it is finally over, yes. And then what? Then we bury the dead. We help this town heal, and we figure out what living looks like instead of just surviving. The execution. Morning came cold and clear. The sky was pale blue, cloudless. Snow covered everything in pristine white, beautiful and indifferent. They built the gallows in the town square, a simple platform, a rope, a trapdoor. Nothing elaborate. This was function, not spectacle. The entire town gathered, some to see justice done, some from morbid curiosity, some because witnessing mattered, because bearing proof that evil had been punished was important. Ruby stood with Finn and Grace. Beatrice joined them, her face set and hard. They did not speak. There was nothing to say. Victor was led from the church cellar at noon. He walked steadily despite the chains. His face showed no fear, no regret, just the same calm expression he had worn throughout the trial. The executioner, a federal marshal brought specifically for this purpose, asked if Victor had final words. Victor looked out at the crowd. His eyes found Ruby again. "Miss Vale, you dedicated a decade to this moment. I hope it brings you what you need." Ruby met his gaze, said nothing. Victor smiled slightly. "I thought not. Revenge never satisfies. You will learn that soon enough." The hood went over his head. The noose tightened around his neck. Ruby did not look away. She had earned this moment, had paid for it in years of hunting, in nights of nightmares, in the constant weight of grief and fury. She would witness every second. The trapdoor opened. Victor Drummond dropped. The rope went taut. His neck broke with an audible crack. His body jerked once, then hung still. Ruby watched until the executioner checked for a pulse and declared him dead. Watched as they cut him down and loaded him into a wagon. Watched as they took his body to be buried in unmarked ground outside of town. No ceremony, no marker. Then she turned and walked away. Behind her the crowd began to disperse. People returned to their lives. The spectacle was over. Justice had been served. Ruby walked to the cemetery, to the graves, waiting for spring burial. Alice, Owen, Garrison, Brenner, Mercer. All of Victor's victims would rest here, remembered and mourned. She knelt in the snow beside the wooden marker that would later become Alice's headstone. "I am sorry I could not save you, but I made sure he paid for it. I made sure everyone knows what he did." The wind answered, cold and clean. Finn found her there an hour later, sat beside her in the snow without speaking, just present, just there. Finally Ruby spoke. "I keep waiting to feel something. Relief, satisfaction, anything. But it is just empty. Maybe that is how it should be. Taking a life, even a monster's life, is not supposed to feel good. It is just necessary sometimes. Catherine would have hated this, all of it, the hunting, the execution. She would have wanted mercy, maybe, but she is not here to choose. You are, and you chose justice. That is not wrong." Ruby stood slowly, looked out at the mountains, snow-capped and eternal. The world had not changed. Victor was dead, but Catherine was still gone. Justice had been served, but the grief remained. What do I do now? The question hung in the frozen air. 1 year later. Winter returned to the high country, arriving with the first snow on an October morning, light flakes that melted on contact harbingers of the season to come. Ruby stood in the doorway of her own small house watching it fall. The house was simple. 2 rooms, a wood stove, a garden plot out back. She had bought it with money saved from her medical practice. It was the first thing she had truly owned since before the war. Spring had come slowly after Victor's execution, snow melting in patches. Mud, then grass, then wildflowers in colors so bright they hurt to look at after months of white and gray. Ruby had opened her practice in what had been Dr. Mercer's office, cleaning it thoroughly, painting the walls, hanging a new sign, Ruby C. Vale Medical Services. The patients had come gradually at first, a miner with a broken finger, a child with fever, a woman in difficult labor. Then word spread. Ruby treated them all with focused competence, charged what they could pay, accepted chickens and firewood when they could not pay in cash, built a life one patient at a time. Grace worked with her, now learning nursing skills, helping with procedures. Luke's memory lived in the careful way Grace handled instruments, in her gentleness with patients. She was becoming the healer her brother never had the chance to be. Beatrice had rebuilt her general store with insurance money and town donations. Smaller than before, but functional. She ran it with the same fierce efficiency she had brought to surviving the winter. The cemetery had filled with proper headstones that spring. Ruby visited, often bringing flowers when they bloomed, spoke to Catherine's memorial stone about patience, about the town, about small victories and daily struggles. And one evening, walking back from the cemetery, Finn had fallen into step beside her. "You have been quiet lately. I have been thinking about staying, about making this permanent. Is that what you want?" For 10 years I moved constantly, never stayed anywhere long enough to put down roots. Ruby had stopped walking, looked at him. The idea of staying, of committing to a place and people terrifies me. Why? Because staying means caring, and caring means I can lose things again, lose people. You can lose people whether you stay or go. Finn's voice had been gentle. Running does not protect you from grief, it just makes you face it alone. Ruby had been quiet for a long moment. Then, if I stay, I want my own place. Not the boarding house, not your ranch, something that is mine. All right. And I want to be clear, I am not staying because of you. I am staying because I choose to. Because this town needs a doctor and I have skills. Because I am tired of running. Understood. But, her voice had softened, I would like to see you, regularly, as more than friends. Finn had smiled. The real smile that reached his eyes. I would like that too. They had walked together through the spring evening, not touching but close. 2 damaged people learning to exist in the same space without armor or pretense. At the edge of town, Ruby had paused, looked back at the cemetery on the hill, at Catherine's stone barely visible in the fading light. I am going to stay. She had said it aloud, testing the words. I am going to build something here. Not to replace what was lost, just to build something new. That sounds like choosing a future, not just enduring the present. Yes, it does. Now, standing in her doorway a year later, Ruby watched the first snow fall and knew she had made the right choice. Inside, patients waited. A boy with a cough, an elderly woman needing arthritis treatment, a miner who had caught his hand in equipment. Ruby treated them all, charged what they could pay, accepted chickens and firewood and labor when they could not pay in cash. Built a life one patient at a time. Grace had moved in with Beatrice, helping run the store while continuing her nursing training. The 2 women had formed an unlikely friendship. Grief recognized grief, and healing happened in shared space. Finn visited Ruby's house 3 evenings a week. They cooked dinner together, talked about daily trivialities, sometimes sat in comfortable silence. The relationship developed slowly, carefully, like people learning to trust after betrayal. One night, sitting by her stove, Ruby spoke about the nightmares that still came. I dream about the mine, about being buried alive, about Victor escaping and coming back. Finn listened without offering easy comfort. The dreams are getting less frequent, Ruby continued. Used to be every night, now maybe once a week. Progress, I suppose. It is progress, but I wonder if they will ever stop completely. If I will ever sleep through a full night without reaching for weapons that are not there. Maybe not, but maybe that is all right. Maybe some scars do not fade. They just become part of who you are. Ruby looked at him. You still dream about Sarah? Every night. Does it get easier? No. But it gets different. Less sharp. More like an old injury that aches when weather changes. Finn's hand found hers. I do not love her less. I just learned to love other things too. Other things. Ruby's voice was soft. Or other people. Maybe both. They sat together in the firelight. Two people who had lost too much and somehow found each other in the wreckage. It was not perfect. Some days were harder than others. Some nights the nightmares won. But they were here, alive, building something that resembled a life. That was enough. For now, it was enough. The memorial. On the anniversary of Victor's execution, the town held a memorial service. Not for him, for his victims. They gathered in the cemetery where proper headstones now marked the graves. Alice Drummond, Owen Pritchard, Sheriff Hal Garrison, Minister Jacob Brenner, Dr. Isaac Mercer, and a stone for Catherine, Vale Ruby's sister, whose body rested elsewhere, but whose memory deserved recognition. Ruby stood before Catherine's stone. She had written the inscription herself, Catherine Vale, nurse, 1842 to 1866. She died saving others. We live because she was brave. People came forward one by one, shared memories of those who had died, spoke of Alice's kindness in her brief time in town, of Owen's terrible jokes, of Garrison's fairness, of Brenner's gentle sermons, of Mercer's skill. When it came time for Ruby to speak, she found she could not. The words stuck in her throat too heavy with grief that had never fully lifted. Finn stepped beside her, spoke for her. Catherine Vale saved 30 men during the war, helped them escape torture and death. She died for that choice. And her sister spent 10 years making sure that sacrifice meant something, making sure the man who killed her faced justice. He paused. We cannot bring them back, any of them. But we can remember. We can build lives they would be proud of. We can choose kindness over cruelty, justice over revenge, life over death. The crowd murmured agreement. Ruby placed wildflowers on Catherine's stone, yellow and purple her sister's favorite colors. I miss you, she whispered, every day. But I am living now, really living, not just surviving. I think you would be happy about that. The wind moved through the cemetery, soft, almost gentle. Ruby turned from the grave, walked back toward town with Finn beside her. Grace and Beatrice followed. Behind them, the stone stood sentinel over the dead. The living moved forward. 2 years after Ruby sat in her examination room updating patient records, outside snow fell again. Another winter, the third since Victor's death. The nightmares had faded to once a month now. She slept better, smiled more. The constant vigilance had eased though never disappeared completely. Some habits were too deeply ingrained. A knock at the door. Finn entered, stamping snow from his boots. Busy always, but never too busy for you. He sat, studied her face. There is something I want to ask you. Ruby set down her pen. All right, will you marry me? The question hung in the air between them. Simple, direct, terrifying. Ruby's first instinct was to refuse, to protect herself from the vulnerability of committing fully to another person, to keep one foot always ready to run. But she had been running for 12 years. She was tired. Yes, the word came out steady. Yes, I will marry you. Finn smiled, pulled out a simple band. Gold unadorned. Practical. It was my mother's. I have been carrying it for 6 months, waiting for the right moment. Ruby took the ring, slipped it onto her finger. It fit. I cannot promise I will be easy to live with. She met his eyes. I have scars. I wake screaming sometimes. I see threats where none exist. I may never be the wife Sarah was. I do not want you to be Sarah. Finn took her hands. I want you to be Ruby, scarred and careful and fierce. That is who I am choosing. Then I choose you too, choosing you back. They married in spring, a small ceremony in the church with Grace and Beatrice as witnesses. No grand celebration, just simple vows spoken before people who mattered. Ruby wore a dress Beatrice had helped her make. Light blue practical with pockets for medical instruments, because even on her wedding day she might be called to help someone. When the minister asked if she took Finn as her husband, Ruby answered clearly, "I do." And when Finn slipped the ring on her finger for the second time, making it official, Ruby felt something shift inside her. Not healing. The wounds were too deep for that, but acceptance, the understanding that she could carry grief and joy simultaneously, could honor the dead while choosing to live. They did not go on a honeymoon. There was work to do, patients to see, a ranch to run. Life continued its daily rhythm. But at night in the house they now shared, Ruby lay beside Finn and felt something she had not felt since before Catherine died. Safe. Not perfectly safe. The world was still dangerous, people still died, grief still waited in quiet moments, but safe enough to rest, safe enough to put down her weapons occasionally, safe enough to imagine a future that extended beyond the next hunt. It was not the ending she had imagined during those 10 years of pursuit. There was no triumph, no satisfaction, just the quiet persistence of living. But it was real, and it was hers, and that finally was enough. The final truth. Ruby never stopped missing Catherine. The grief became familiar, a constant companion that walked beside her through the years. Some days it was heavier than others. Some days she could almost forget it was there. She never had children. That particular future was not written for her, but she delivered dozens of babies, watched them grow, became Aunt Ruby to half the children in Tin Cup. Grace married eventually, a quiet carpenter who made her laugh. They named their first daughter Catherine Ruby, the second generation of survivors. Beatrice ran her store until she was 80, died peacefully in her sleep. Left everything to Grace with a note that said simply, "You were the daughter I never had." Finn aged beside Ruby. Gray hair became white. Calloused hands grew stiff with arthritis. But his eyes stayed the same. Steady. Constant. They had 37 years together. Not enough. Never enough. But more than many people got. When Finn died, Ruby did not shatter. The grief was enormous, but she had learned to carry enormous griefs. She continued her practice. Continued helping. Continued living because that was what you did. People asked sometimes if she regretted the 10 years spent hunting Victor. If she wished she had let it go, moved on sooner, found Finn earlier. Ruby always gave the same answer. No, I do not regret it. Catherine deserved justice. All of his victims deserved justice, and I was the only one willing to spend my life making sure they got it. But she also told the truth about what justice cost. It cost me 10 years of my life. It cost me the chance to heal sooner. It cost me sleep and peace and the ability to trust easily. Revenge is expensive. Justice even more so. Was it worth it? Ruby would consider the question. Think about Catherine, about Alice, about all the others. Yes, it was worth it, but I would not recommend it. If you can find a way to heal without hunting, do that instead. Final entry. Ruby, Catherine Vale, died at 73, peacefully in her sleep in the house she had built. They found her in the morning lying in bed with her hands folded over a photograph. The image showed 2 young women in nurses' uniforms, sisters, smiling. Before the war changed everything. They buried her beside Finn beneath a headstone that read simply, Ruby Catherine Vale, 1846 to 1919. Healer, sister. She chose justice over revenge and life over death. The town mourned. The church was packed. People shared stories of births she had attended, illnesses she had cured, lives she had saved. Grace stood before the grave and placed wildflowers, yellow and purple, Catherine's colors. She lived well, Grace said quietly to the stone. That is what mattered in the end. When everyone had gone, when the sun set behind the mountains, Catherine Vale's memorial stone stood beside her sister's grave, finally together again. In the end, the story was not about revenge. Not really. It was about a woman who refused to let evil win, who hunted a monster across a decade and made him face justice, who then put down her weapons and learned to heal instead of hurt. It was about choosing to live fully in a world that had taken too much, about building something good from the wreckage of grief. That was Ruby's true victory. Not the hanging, not the trial, but the 37 years she spent afterward choosing to build rather than destroy every single day. Victor Drummond died unmourned and forgotten. Ruby Catherine Vale was remembered for generations. In the end, that was justice enough. The end.